Hey, listen, we got some things that we gotta discuss. How we can affect the system and make it better for us. But first, we gotta start with the man in the mirror. Open your third eye and the vision's gonna be much clearer. We are revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute, but those who pollute the minds of many. Revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many, y'all. This is the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, y'all.
All right, welcome to episode 5 of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. And I'm one of your hosts, Ace.
I'm your other host, Alicia.
And we're back with Ken for the second time in 2 weeks. What's up, Ken?
Hey, what's going on, Christian? Hi, Alicia. How you guys doing?
Good. We had so much good stuff to talk about that we didn't get to last time, and there's been some relevant, kind of juicy stuff going on in the present moment with the NASW and whatnot. And so we're going to dive right into it so we can, see where it takes us. And, but there's a court case that's going on, an insurance company that the NASW has been affiliated with is suing the NASW. And I'm just going to turn it over to Alicia, because while this is fairly new information for us, we've only had a little bit of time, but Alicia's been diving deep into the court case. So what do you know about it?
Fascinating. It's so interesting we all know that we need liability coverage, but to know what's going on behind the scenes with the insurance company and NASW, I had no idea. And so this lawsuit, for anyone that hasn't seen, is between Prefera, the insurance company who provides a lot of our liability coverage, and NASW and their subsidiaries, NASW Assurance Services and NASW. I can't remember what that stands for. But so Prefera filed this complaint, this lawsuit against NASW. I think when I looked back, January 23, is when Anthony Estreet, who is the current CEO of NASW, he took on leadership, and it looks like that's where things started to go a little bit downhill. He didn't like a lot of the financial flow coming from Prefera into NASW. And I saw in the lawsuit, you may have seen, Ken, as well, I know you were reading this, is they've received over $70 million from the insurance companies through ASI, NASW Assurance Services. So they receive a lot of financial benefit from Prefera. But apparently, Dr. Estreet didn't like or wanted more. And so he was trying to put these different policies in place, and a lot of things went down. And then it led to they backing up a little bit. I think he had criminal charges as well, right, and licensing issues. And that they weren't aware of. And so he was taken off the board, and then he terminated other people in ASI who were deemed very competent in ASI, but terminated their board membership and appointed other people from NASW. And so there's all of this crap going on behind the scenes. And so then that whole partnership breaks down, and now we see in this lawsuit that NASW is still kind of misleading and confusing policyholders and claiming to be the insurance provider when Prefera is. So taking a lot of just misinformation is being put out there. But a lot of corruption, financial corruption going on behind the scenes, power dynamics behind the scenes. It's just sketchy. Let's see, what else did I note down? The incompetence as well. I think it looks like Dr. Estreet there's a lot of incompetence with legally and regulatory, trying to lead these subsidiaries in the insurance companies. So just a lot. And Ken, you can probably help me break those things down. But I just didn't realize all of this was happening behind the scenes with a liability coverage company.
Right. Same here. And you did a great job breaking down the lawsuit. I have nothing to add to that. However, I think what gets very interesting is once you start to think about the actual lawsuit in tandem with what was posted on LinkedIn for the VP's resignation, and there seems to be some coherence there between some of the things that she said that might sort of be congruent with what we read in the lawsuit. So again, the lawsuit is just, that's just what's being put out for now to the public, but we don't know, we got to obviously have a trial or some sort of litigation before we get to, so we can give people a chance to defend themselves. But at the same time, I think we really should get into some of the, maybe you want to get into some of the more detailed accusations, not so much from the lawsuit, but maybe talk about the VP resigning. Also, NASW defended E Street, and we can probably talk about that as well. And then we can get into their response to the Prefera lawsuit, which both dropped on the same day, 2 days ago. So again, it's a lot to keep up with. And again, I just started digging into this a couple of days ago, and it's moving pretty fast, and we haven't gotten any new information. But what has been interesting that's happened is some information has been sort of scrubbed, and we can't necessarily get that original post for why the vice president. We don't have that post anymore. So I did take some screenshots though, and so we did get to read it. We did some sleuthing, and some people did find the original post, and there were some serious accusations there about, some, money, NASW monies that were used for, private trips or, for making private purchases, a lot of mismanagement of funds, and a lot of corruption and also incompetence. So I don't think, I'm just saying what we learned from the lawsuit is it dovetails pretty well with what the VP, some of the things that the VP mentioned. And for her post to be scrubbed, there are rumors saying that she had to get rid of those posts. So we don't know. It's all speculation. Everybody's just trying to figure everything out now. We don't know. Nothing's been confirmed, but that's what it looks like to people who are watching it. That's what the conversation has been.
I might as well just read it to be upfront. Show what it says, because rather than us summarizing this, it says so. And just to give context to what he was saying, what Ken was just saying, this was posted on LinkedIn, and I noticed it a couple days live on LinkedIn, and then when I went back to look at it again, it was just one sentence. I don't want to say ranty, but it's definitely full of vitriol. She's definitely upset. She obviously has a lot invested in what's going on with the NASW, and it doesn't sound like she wanted, she's quitting because she wanted to or anything like that. But let me just read it. Mm-hmm. It says, "It is with deep regret that I announce my resignation as the Vice President of NASW. Following the President's request and under the pressure of the General Counsel, this decision arose from my comment on a post regarding Prefera, in which I agreed that I too was misled and lied to by the CEO. Let me be perfectly clear. My loyalty has always been and remains to the mission and integrity of this organization, not to any individual CEO. No one is above the law. In my short time as Vice President, I've been made aware of numerous grave allegations: workplace violence, misuse of funds, unethical behavior, racial and sexual discrimination, fraud, misrepresentation, conflicts of interest, and retaliation. As someone entrusted with the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience to this organization, it was my responsibility to act. In fulfilling my responsibilities, I too faced intimidation. But that didn't work. Now I call upon each of you, members, social workers, staff, and stakeholders, to stand up with me in defense of the NASW's values and future. As Michelle Obama has said, you don't get anywhere by sitting on the sidelines. You need to do something. We cannot afford to be passive observers. We cannot allow complacency to protect unethical behavior. Let me be clear. Those who choose to stand idly by, or worse, protect misconduct, must be held accountable. I was elected to this position by the stakeholders and should not have been told that I had to resign for doing my job. I would remind the General Counsel that her salary is paid by the organization's stakeholders, not Anthony E. Street. The CEO does not own NASW. He does not hold ultimate authority over its future. That power belongs to us, the members, the social workers, and everyone who believes in the ethical mission of the organization. We have the duty of loyalty to NASW, not to any one leader, and together we have both the right and the responsibility to ensure our leaders are ethical, compassionate, and accountable to the people they serve. Anthony E. Street, as a woman, or Anthony, it looks like this is directed to Anthony E. Street. As a woman of color and a first-generation Latina, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to provide for my sister and me, I am hurt and disgusted. In the 19 months of your employment, you destroyed our credibility to promote or to protect your self-interest. Instead of choosing the pathway of righteousness, you sought revenge. We must all pay the price for the wrongdoing and risk losing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with Prefera. Most importantly, this will leave many social workers employed at NASW without a job. Lastly, let us not pursue social justice through vengeance, but through peaceful and intentional actions. We must free ourselves from distractions and maintain our focus on creating meaningful change at NASW. Let us not be silenced by fear, but guided by truth. As always, stay safe and God bless. I can't say I understand fully everything that she's talking about, but I agree with the spirit of, what she's putting forth as taking back the organization to the actual people of the NASW. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like the NASW in general has moved toward this, more of a profit or interest-driven atmosphere into and away from, the focus of its individual members collectively. And they, to me, not only in line with the Democratic Party's politics, but in the way that they operate, complete denial whenever there's an accusation or something. There's no, often, like when we talk about Anthony E. Street, the criminal conviction, I have no problem with a person that's been convicted of a crime, serving or being in a position of power or second chance elevating themselves. I'm all about that. But I would think that if it were me, because I have some small criminal convictions and, I had a history with drugs way back in the day, I look at it now where I used to be kind of ashamed of it. I would think that if I was the CEO of the NASW, I would want videos and, written material of me addressing it directly and letting the people know in full disclosure what I did and what's happened, why I'm different now. Because I would look at it as more of like something on my resume because I've been through those experiences and overcome them. But when we hide them and we don't disclose things, it seems like everything's done in secrecy. And when other interests, all these financial interests are involved, I mean, we know what we've seen that equation too many times to not know what the result ends up being. And so it seems to me that NASW has kind of been co-opted in a way.
Right. And the revenge that she talks about, I mean, it seems it goes back to when all of this came out to the Prefera board and he was removed from that. And then he terminated so many other people's positions. And so, yeah, that revenge instead of just being upfront about it. But I think you're right. Once organizations like NASW become so connected to political parties, just following the money, because, I mean, look, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but when I started looking into PACE, NASW PACE, and the endorsements and the financial contributions that they make, predominantly to the Democratic Party. I couldn't find any Green Party members, independent members. There was like a couple local House members that were Republican, but predominantly the Democratic Party. Once you get so entwined with that, how do we remain true to the code of ethics and social work values and just the social work members? I just don't think we can. And we're seeing now that they're not.
Yeah, I feel like you're absolutely right. We don't. And I feel like just looking into this situation the past couple of days, you just realize, the NASW is a corporate entity. And it kind of reminds me of like the unions that are, kind of like the union dynamic that's happening where like the union members have one set of politics, but the union leaders are just like these hyper partisan people who like don't respond to the needs of their their union membership, but they respond to the needs of the Democratic Party. And I feel like NASW may be the same way. I dug through, and I know you sent the PACE candidate endorsement criteria to me before, so I did have a chance to look through it. But, and they're well within their rights to choose to select this or endorse a specific candidate. And if they want to give contributions, they can. And I know there's a difference between federal and local, or local, state, and federal. They make a distinction. However, I'm not so sure that the NASW should be a partisan institution at all, being as though we are social workers. In fact, I would argue that we should probably be, our organization that houses or represents social workers should absolutely be nonpartisan, because now what it looks like is a conflict of interest, right? So you're folks, you're having us you're endorsing Kamala Harris, and we can probably get to that endorsement now or some others or later, and talk about some of the specific language that they use in the endorsement. And I'm just like, okay, that sounds good, but what about all these other things and all these other issues that are social work values too, that maybe Kamala is not congruent with as well? But I don't think there's room or space to have that within the NASW. It seems like it's just like a top-down sort of, hey, we made this endorsement, so y'all just need to fall in line. And I don't know how useful an organization with that sort of top down culture at all is congruent to social work values, one, and like it's not even representative of I won't say most, but it's not representative of a lot of social workers, people that I know anecdotally, you know. So I don't know, we need to have a longer conversation about that. And also that the part about Dr. Eastreet and the conviction. And I agree with you, Christian, you know, as someone who works in restorative justice and, you know, believes in second chances in a country that clearly doesn't, right? I mean, they scarlet letter anybody who has a past criminal conviction, and, you know, and I mean, now there's starting to be some restorative stuff, you know, to let people vote and, you know, things like that. I'm glad we're getting to that point, but I mean, it's long overdue. The country has never been serious about giving people second chances. So, I mean, I think that's something that was an opportunity to really lean into it and just say, hey, you know, I had a criminal conviction, and or not just hide it. You don't have to lean into it and say, hey, and, you know, flash it up and hold it up as a badge, but more so like, you know, this is something that happened, and use it as an educational opportunity, as a teaching moment to say, you know, about restorative justice, about, you know, reform for the criminal justice system or a criminal injustice system and things like that. So, I mean, to hide it, to, you know, agree with your first point, Alicia, like that is suspect, and it does make things look a little bit more suspicious all around.
I think it shows that you know, the motives are more to align with the Democratic Party than it would be, and that side of things, than it would be to affiliate yourself with a criminal or with somebody with a criminal background. And I would think that if you wanted like the ultimate power, and as far as trust in the people, like the people believed in you and trusted you, it would take full disclosure, right? They would need to know you and have confidence in you. So like I said, if I wanted them to trust me, I would say in my own words, you would not be hard to find. You would be able to find me telling you about those things, what happened, where they stemmed from, what I did about them, how it made me who I am today, and how it's rather than a hindrance or something negative, it's actually something positive because it helped shape me into what I know today. And it would help all those folks that also have criminal histories and whatnot. It would give them somebody to say, hey, you know, you kind of look like me. Yeah, I could see myself being like you, you know. And but what, you know, when like if the CEO of the NASW is afraid, or I don't know why he doesn't, I guess not afraid, I don't know if he's afraid, but if he won't put that information out there and he won't share it, you know, what hope does that give to those people versus being a shining example? You know, leading by example. That's, you know, that's inspiring in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the message it puts out. One thing that's made me hopeful though is when I've been researching this and looking on social media too, but like Reddit and just looking around, there are so many more people than I thought talking about this, and so many more people talking around the way that we are of what is going on and how can we trust the NASW. And so that gives me hope, because I didn't think as many people were falling away from the status quo, but it's happening. And so it's going to be really interesting how NASW respond to this, because people have lost trust.
I agree. And somebody like me who was completely indifferent, like I've been a social worker for 10 years. I never joined the NASW. I never thought to, I didn't really have any incentive to do so. And I didn't really see the benefit, but now it's getting people like me who are totally indifferent to the organization to like really, okay, now let's look at this and let's like really start paying attention. So it's like the equivalent of a non-voter, someone who doesn't vote Democrat or Republican, but doesn't pay attention to any election. But finally they're galvanized, like, wait, I'm paying attention to this now. Like, what's happening here? You know what I mean? So I think this situation even galvanized those folks, you know, those folks like me who are just totally checked out. NASW, what's happening with it is totally off their radar. You know what I mean? So the last 2 days have been really just searching through this and like trying to find information. Everybody's like us, like nobody knows what's, you know, and this information dropped on a Friday. And like a lot of times that is on purpose, right? Because, you know, Friday, people are starting their weekend, they're getting off of work, and they're not really checking the news like that, you know what I mean? So a lot of times it's strategic when they drop things on a Friday afternoon. But yeah, I think as we get into a new week and people start talking about it a lot more, this is really going to be something that people are not going to stop talking about, and people are going to be paying attention to this, because I'm curious to know what's going on. And I'm glad that we're having even broader conversations of like, what even is the NASW, and like, how does it really serve us? You know what I mean? And now like we're having a conversation also about why does it need to be a partisan organization? You know what I mean? And so yeah, we're having these conversations, and we need to have these conversations. So, and hopefully we can keep them going.
Yeah, and speaking of going back to being a partisan organization, is that the idea of endorsements. I think I can't wrap it around my finger. Period. I don't like the idea of an association of social workers doing endorsements, because I just really don't see any true way to express the will of the people, because the will of the people is not completely aligned politically.
And it's only 7 to 13 committee members that are deciding this.
Yeah, and then you looked at their criteria, and about getting their somebody that's going to push social work interests and this and that, and I just think that it should be the opposite. If you were going to endorse or potentially endorse, like, by no means are we saying we will, but we would consider it. But you're going to have to, these are the issues that are important to many social workers. And so, if you want our endorsement, you've got to move on them. For example, like whatever, Gaza or whatever you're talking about, political corruption. There's a number of things, you could ask for, or you could negotiate with. And then the other side of it is, they're not really endorsing Kamala Harris. They're endorsing against Donald Trump. And I think there's several things about that, is that you can't, if we keep doing that forever, then why would the Democrats ever move? Because they only have to try to get people to perceive them as better than they're evil, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, like, if you look at Republicans, Trump is often calling Kamala Harris and the radical left as these communists, right? But they're not. They're capitalists to the bone. I mean, there's nothing, Kamala Harris might say something once in a while that she's not actually going to do that kind of goes in that direction. But everything else that she says and does, and the people that she aligns herself with, are full-blown capitalists. So she's obviously not over there, right? In that it's an over-exaggeration. But the Democratic people, often people that follow the Democrats, don't understand and realize that it's the same thing on the other side. They call Donald Trump this many things, that he's going to do these many things, but he was already in office for 4 years and he didn't do those things. And there's a lot of things that you can criticize about him. You don't have to you don't have to go into the dictator Hitler. It's a big jump to call somebody the next Hitler when they no evidence of them killing anyone, compared to what we know about that, the magnitude of it. And so there's that side of it. But I just think that it should be used if anything, as a leverage of power. If you want social workers' endorsements, then you really have to reflect social work values, and you have to demonstrate it.
Yeah. And don't you think, because when I look through the endorsement, they say they're non-partisan, which is, looking at the history, is not true. But 2, they say that the candidates don't have to meet all of the social work values, or however they write it. But it seems backwards to me, because they're like, okay, we have a Democrat here, we have Harris. Well, I guess she's for this, and she's kind of for this, and she's for this. Okay, we endorse. But shouldn't we be looking at, okay, what are the true core social work values? What is important to us? Which, wouldn't that be, looking at the whole Israel-Gaza thing, wouldn't it be considering that? Wouldn't it be considering health of social workers and the people we work with? Wouldn't it be considering wages of social workers? And none of those things is what she represents. So we're doing it totally backwards. And
I think that was the point I was exactly the point I was trying to get at. If they were really trying to endorse a candidate that met social work values, well, why don't you compare Kamala Harris and Cornel West and tell me who actually aligns with social work values, and why aren't you talking about Cornel West then? Because you're not endorsing the candidate that aligns with social work values. Your endorsement is against Donald Trump.
Right. And who knows where the money is also between NASW and the Democratic Party, where they're now tied to that.
I did a big assignment, or a big project last spring with my classes, where I had them evaluate the back when the field was much larger, and all the candidates and their alignment with social work values. And we didn't actually do Kamala Harris because she wasn't on the ballot at the time. We did Biden, but you know, he was not when they really analyzed it, like both, you know, the Joe Biden was near the bottom of all those candidates for how he actually aligned, his history actually had aligned with social work values. And at the top was Cornel West, RFK was hovering up there. There was like a, you know, people had, at that time, their concern was his dissent when it came to the big V of the V word. I don't want to say it on here.
Oh, right.
But, and Jill Stein was up there. And, you know, people have their, I think the big argument is they say that those folks have no chance to win. But I mean,
they never will if we keep going along this path.
Yeah.
They always want to give that defeatist, like, you know, that defeatist attitude. They want to make you feel like you can't win. So you just have to default to the Democratic Party. And can I respond to a couple of things that you guys said?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, about Trump, I mean, they go out of their way to try to make Trump out to be like this very special existential threat. And I'm just like, guys, I don't see that. Like, we already had Trump as president. Like, come on. I feel like the Democrats, all they really have, besides, like, again, trying to make themselves look better by demonizing the other side. And it's just like, they always want you to vote for them out of a place of fear and anxiety, right? You just, every 4 years, you got to be scared, or like the world is going to end if we don't win. You know what I mean? So they make every election is the most important election of our lifetime, really. So 2028 is going to be the next most important election of our lifetime. Like, it's just, okay. You know what I mean? And one thing that really annoys me about a lot of the rhetoric that, you know, you'll hear on MSNBC, the extremist rhetoric, you'll hear about the other side, you know, they're Hitler, they're going to, you know, and then even on the right too, they call like Kamala Harris a communist. I'm like, come on. So it's like the Overton window. So that's a political science term when we talk about the Overton window. And it's like, it's shifted so far to the right that like, and people on the right think that Kamala and like Biden are true lefties. And I'm like, there's nothing left about them. They're center right, if anything, you know what I mean? But this is a whole conversation. About, you know, that sort of thing. But now going back to, this also ties into what we talked about the last episode in terms of like people being non-critical thinkers. So like talking about Kamala being a communist or Trump being some sort of fascist Hitler-like figure. And it's just like, you ask people, okay, what is fascism? What is communism? And when you ask people those questions, even they use the terms, oh, you're a fascist or you're a communist. But I'm like, okay, what does that mean? What makes them a communist? What makes them a fascist? And I test them. And they're like, I don't know. They just are. And I'm just like, okay, well, tell me what are the characteristics that make you come to that conclusion? And they just can't. So again, people are just narrative repeaters. And like I say, we have a crisis of epistemology, right? I'm a researcher. That's what I do. So as a researcher, you have to bring receipts, right? You can't just say, come to a conclusion. I have to show how I got there. I have to show my math. I have to show my work. I have to show exactly how we got there. So we talk about pedagogy, like the art and science of teaching, but the epistemology, the art and science of learning, how do you know what you know? And that's what I challenge people on, right? How do you know what you know? If you can't explain to me how you got to that conclusion, then that tells me that you adopted that conclusion from someplace else and it was implanted in here and you just adopted it as your own. If you can't defend it, if you can't tell me how you got there. Right now, how does this all have to do with this? All has to do with the NASW. So endorsing Kamala with absolutely zero demands, you didn't even ask her for anything. You just have it. You know what I mean? Again, like you said, Christian, because it's just an endorsement against Trump. And I think that puts us in a very dangerous like scenario because like the Democrats have no incentive to ever deliver anything for you. Like you were saying, if all they got to do is like, again, put you in that space of fear and anxiety. They keep you in that, like, you know, you have the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. The downstairs brain is where you do all where the emotional self live, where you react impulsively, the fight or flight response. They keep their base in that particular space. So they're just like, I have to vote for them. They're going to save me from whatever this existential threat that they laid out for me. So it's just keeping people on that MSNBC, CNN hamster wheel and just like keeping them afraid. And keeping them like, you know, it's just, they're easier to control that way. And like Alicia talking about what you said, or, you know, touching on what you said about how do a lot of Kamala's policies, like, or how are they congruent with like social work values? They just absolutely aren't. I would love to hear NASW make an argument for why we should be supporting the Democratic Party after what has been going down in Gaza right now, and after they're sending so many weapons while at the same time talking about, you know, giving lip service to a ceasefire. Obviously, they don't mean that. I put precedence over people's actions over their words. I don't care what you're saying. I'm looking at what you're showing me, and they're showing me that they are 100% in league with the Israelis with this and they are 100% compliant with this genocide. So how is the NASW in turn going to ask us social workers to vote for the Democratic Party while this is still going on? We're about to be a year. It's about to be October 7th, 2024, and you want us to vote for the Democratic Party while this is going on. And I need you guys to explain that. Why aren't you saying anything? What about the Green Party? What about their policy positions? They seem to be a lot more progressive and more aligned with social work values than the Democratic Party. So why is it? And I would love somebody to explain that to me. Why do we need to support the Democratic Party? Why are you endorsing them? And how are each of their policy positions consistent with social work values? Specifically, what's going on in Palestine right now? I challenge them to answer that question.
Well, that's the thing about social work, is they care a lot about evidence-based practice or evidence, period, until they don't. And that's not very far. You know what I'm saying? You can go get your graduate degree and you're going to have to take a couple research courses. They're going to tell you about how it needs to be evidence-based. You're going to go do maybe a little research project, prove that equine therapy works in these situations and this and that. And then when you're presented with something that conflicts with what social work is at the current moment, that doesn't actually align, then we just kind of look the other way. We don't worry. For some reason, social work, obviously there's plenty of individuals and plenty of groups and whatever, but for some reason, social work as a collective and many individuals are not able to look at these things critically. And I'm no blame, because we've all been there before, right? It's like criticizing my previous self, right? I've been blind to things and not seen things as well. And I'm sure I am right now. And so it's not a criticism on individuals or anything like that. It's just, it's a question of like, how do we get here where we're blindly following these things? And part of it obviously is just NASW's had too much power, and it's been taken for granted that there ought to be alternatives, and that they're just take for granted that it's the National Association of Social Workers, so they must be good, right? Mm-hmm. But actually it's much more complicated than that. And there's certainly good people and good things that happen through the NASW. But when an organization becomes over convoluted like this and gets in alignment and makes these alliances with politicians and political entities and whatnot, it gets out of control and it loses its way. And I don't know much about Anthony Eastreet, so I don't even want to slander him before, I know more about him or anything like that. But from, the perspective I have now, he just seems like celebrity political kind of culture. Yeah. And I would just like to see a more, collective movement within social work where individuals are working together to collectively create smaller groups that lead to larger groups and so on and so on. But it starts from the smaller groups, right? Mm-hmm. And outward, and not the opposite, not an individual at the top of a large group that dictates what happens to the smaller group. It's actually the smaller groups that dictate what happens to the larger level. And, that was one of the things I wanted to say, and it takes us a little bit off, but NASW has pretty much, just been the unmalleable organization for social workers ever since I've been involved for over a decade or so. Yeah. And I was one that took it for granted. I never really thought about this all. And what we're learning now, I realize also that I didn't really know much at all about the NASW.
No.
As it really is. But I wonder if there's a hole there. My old mentor was a Yupik elder. Her name's Grandmother Rita Blumenstein, and she'd have these great sayings. She would say that as individuals, right, many of us have been hurt and traumatized, or we've went through these things, and it leaves us as adults as these people that are hurting with a hole, H-O-L-E in us, right? And in order to become whole, W-H-O-L-E, well, you got to figure out how to fill that hole up with what you need instead of like what you're relying on from the past or whatever. And I wonder if social work's in the same situation right now, where there's this hole that's, from the way that things have been done, and we're in this current situation moving into the future, and social work has a big hole in it. and it needs to be filled up so that social work as a thing, and I'm not saying NASW can't even be a part of that, but to be whole again, WHOLE, as a profession, as a group of individuals. And I wonder if revolutionary social work might be able to fill that gap somehow. And if either of you could, if you or if any of us, we could imagine that, like what would that look like if there were an alternative organization? And how would it, not only what would it look like, but like how would you even begin something like that? And maybe we already have. I'm just saying, how would we ever do it if we can't? And that's what Angela Davis would say. How would you ever achieve it if you can't imagine it and see it in your, when you close your eyes or when you're talking amongst each other? How can you achieve it if you cannot even see what it might look like? And I think that's part of it, is we've been blinded, or we've been hoodwinked into thinking that this is the way things are and that's the way it is and it's the only way, when in reality, we control as individuals, but as collective of social workers, we control our own destiny. So if we want something different than what we currently have, then it's up to us to first think about it and imagine it, and then, start that boulder rolling down the mountain and see what becomes of it.
And I think we can be a part of that, because when I'm imagining also when we're talking about endorsements for political candidates, politics is a part of social work. It's inevitable. It's going to be a part of social work. But when I imagine it for social workers, I imagine like something that lines out the different values of each candidate and how each value aligns with each social work value. And maybe none of them actually fully align with social workers, but like that just being a critical document, looking that way rather than, okay, we have this one, she kind of fits this, okay, we're endorsing her. I imagine it in looking at all of the candidates and outlining all of the values that they represent and all of the challenges that it poses towards social work. And we can be a part of that. I mean, we can put that together already.
One of the ways I was telling you that came to my mind is, as a professor, I'm involved in a lot of these things, textbooks, and NASW provides a lot of the content for like intro to social work and whatnot. But what if, as we move forward in revolutionary social work, we actually contributed books, I don't want to call them textbooks, but supplementary books that was like how to revolutionize social work 101 or introduction to social work. And then it's a book that helps people gather the resources they need and information they need to provide a more of a revolutionary experience than, as long as not just content, but methods and all of that stuff. And you could do that for human behavior in the social environment and everything, and apply more revolutionary social work values and principles into that to help educators, and then that's going to have a ripple effect and so on. So that's just one small way that I thought about it. But, I still struggle to see how we can organize. Because I think, a lot of what we're taught about organizing, right, happens from we learn about like the 60s and 70s and whatnot, and we don't organize the same way anymore. In one way we're more connected and easier to contact, and in some ways we're much harder. Yeah. It's much harder to get somebody's interest today than it was back in those days. But what do you think, Ken?
I love the idea of an alt-org, and I'm all about detaching from systems that aren't serving us and might even be a detriment to us, which are supposed to be on our side. I think I like the language you use, like social work has a hole and it needs to be filled up to be whole again. So I don't know what it would look like to have an organization. This would probably take a lot of brainstorming sessions, a lot of workshopping, and a lot of organization. But one thing I can tell you from the jump that I would not want the organization to be is partisan, right? So I just don't think social work, and I think we need to engage politicians, but I don't think we should engage them of a particular political party. I think we see what happens with that. I'll give you an example. There was a social worker in the Democratic Party. This was during Trump's term. Her name was Kirsten Sinema or Kristen Sinema of Arizona, MSW. I vividly remember her. There was a vote that came up for $15 minimum wage, and not only did she vote no for it, when it was her turn to vote no, she went up to the front of the establishment and did a curtsy and did a thumbs down, right, on camera. So it just goes to show, like, you're a social worker. I feel like you would be more I feel like you would be more sympathetic and empathetic with the working class people who could really use that increase in their wages, right? But again, it just shows that once you become part of that club, you're kind of a class trader. If I consider myself working class. So once you get up there, you're a class trader, and you're no longer looking out for us in the working class. Now you're part of that elite group, And I mean, we can talk all about how, people in Congress just like get so rich. I mean, their salaries are I don't know, a couple $100K a year, but they end up being millionaires, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars because of all the insider trading that goes on. We cannot be a part of that. I feel like we should have an adversarial relationship with politicians for the most part. I mean, we can work collaboratively to get things done and to advocate, but you cannot be friends with these people, because once you become friends with these people, that's when you start rubbing shoulders with them. They become your friends. And next thing you know, you guys have class interests, and you're no longer representing, your base anymore. So I don't know what a new organization would look like. I know I love the idea of it. And I'm down to have more conversations with any social worker who's willing to put the time in to like organize around that, because I feel like we need to start doing that. And I think maybe this might be the kickoff point. This whole situation that's happening now may be the kickoff point for people to start. This may be a catalyst for people to really start getting to work on that.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts there. Just to backtrack real quick, thinking about politicians. This is, I think, the Rastafarians have it right when they talk about the power of language, and they use dread talk, and they reframe things from negative sounding to positive sounding and things like that. And the power of meaning, but also like the power of the language that we use for things. So like you'll hear people call Nancy Pelosi, the former leader of the Democratic Party, right, for a very long time. You'll hear people call her like a public servant. You talk about how she serves. Okay, well, I think traditionally, if you were just to say the word servant, you would think of like something along the lines of slavery or something like that. Somebody who's serving, maybe even they get paid. But a server, right? They serve somebody. You definitely don't think of that person as somebody who's wealthy, right? Or as who's elevating themselves in such a way. Well, like Nancy Pelosi came into office, I'm not going to even say the amount, but with more money than we have, but not that much money in the big scheme of things. And she only makes which she still makes more than most people, a couple $100,000 a year. But now she has hundreds of millions of dollars from stock trades where she has info about that kind of thing. And just the other day, Visa got put up with a lawsuit against them, and her husband took out I don't know how much, millions of dollars in stocks. And so when we use that kind of language and we call somebody like that a public servant, but yet they're using it fully to enrich themselves, we know how San Francisco is doing in some ways. So definitely the people of San Francisco haven't seen the riches that have come from the representative. And so how we frame that and how we can come to terms with that as social workers and as human beings that are involved and aware of this political spectrum that's going on, that has to be completely unacceptable. Like, do you know what I mean? And if we're aligning ourselves with such folks, then we're going to be like those folks more than we want to be. And I think that that's where you get into the problem with the bigger dogs when they are, in more of this, like I said, political celebrity culture, that they get sucked into that. They become more them than us.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
And that's, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And say that's when you think about an organization too, the NASW has become so top down, which it isn't congruent with what we're talking about, right? We need it to start from grassroots up. We need to still be working on the ground to know exactly what social workers need, which we all are right now. But when you become so elevated up there and disconnected and involved with all these politicians and in stocks and investments and all of that, you're so disconnected, and that is why it's not working. It's so top down, and it's never going to work.
I also think that reframing the way that we look at things. So, right, the NASW provides lots of services and stuff, right? So, like conferences and whatever. But what do you get usually when you go to a conference or when you go to a training? What are you doing it for, to earn?
Oh, yeah, CEUs.
CEUs, okay? So, I never really liked the idea of it. I mean, like sometimes, like for example, I think it can be a complete contradiction at times. In your own life, you might really need some self-care, but you got to go get a CEU, so you go to a CEU course on self-care when you really should have been practicing the self-care on your own. So it's a contradiction, and you're doing it to fill a box that was made for every social worker, but it really doesn't fit your current situation, if that makes sense. And this happens, I think, in a lot of scenarios. So Yeah, I think if from a revolutionary social work perspective, if you had an organization that was similar in nature, or not in nature, but in the way that it's trying to operate and represent and provide things for social workers, instead of having CEUs, what if you had dialogue opportunities? Opportunities for social workers to engage in dialogue with each other in some kind of a circle, whatever that means, whether that's online, in person, whatever. It could even be back and forth through like a voice thread type of thing, whatever it is. But there were opportunities for social workers really and truly to learn from amongst each other and to share things. I think you would gain so much more than you would from having the CEUs, or at least a combination of both, if that makes sense, when you do it. And, you know, say you have a CEU, but there should also be the dialogic part of it, where too often I go to things and they tell you all about, like, even like anti-racism or something or whatever, and it's like they tell you all these things, but like there was never even an opportunity for the people to actually share. And I think folks are afraid of what people might say and stuff, but how the hell will we ever grow out of that if we're unable to talk about things and the opportunities aren't there, right? You could go to a NASW conference or some kind of event, and there very well could be dialogue opportunities. I'm not saying there wouldn't, but you wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't, that it was mostly a training where somebody stood up there and presented to you. And I'm not saying those things are all bad. I went to plenty and learned a lot and met some really cool people at NASW conferences, as a matter of fact. So I'm not dissing that as a whole. I'm just saying it's missing a huge element, I believe, and it's misprioritized. The priority should actually be on making sure that we have the space and the opportunities to engage in dialogue with each other and learn from each other's experiences and each other's, ideas and wisdom, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And that keeps us thinking critically too. It's like you said, Ken, when we lose our critical mind and we can't give evidence or reason for how we got to a conclusion, we just start to absorb information from wherever it is and then don't critically think about it. But if we're in these dialogic talking circles, you have to be critical, and you have to know where you got your views from. You have to be able to talk on it. And I know that's really helpful for me. I have to be in those spaces to kind of force me to question myself and challenge, where did I get that? Or am I just saying it because I heard it? But we don't prioritize that right now.
Yes, well, critical thinking, it's a skill. It's something that can be developed and can be learned, and a lot of people don't. Like I said, some of the smartest people I know. In fact, some people, like physicians, so to speak. Physicians, some of the smartest people I know. But when it comes to social issues, oh my gosh, they fail so hard, man. It's like they just have the worst takes ever, and it's just like, I could tell you never took any type of sociology class or anything like that. You never thought about this beyond just superficial thinking. You know what I mean? So like, I do try to give people grace, but before we get into other stuff, I just want to say real quick, Nancy Pelosi, shout out to Nancy Pelosi Stock Tracker on Twitter. If you don't follow that, please do. Going back to what you said, Christian, about, naming things and calling it what it is, and like being very intentional with our language. I mean, we have to, I think part of that, if we're brainstorming, thinking about an alternative to the NASW, we have to we have to understand what we're dealing with here. And so when we're dealing with politicians, we have to understand that I argue that we don't live in a democracy. It's too much money in politics for us to live in a democracy. I feel like people don't have much power. The only place that we have power left is on the local level, ordinary people, in my opinion. I think this is evidenced by the fact that public opinion can be over here for one thing, but the policy position that we get from our legislature is all the way on the other side. Popular policy positions do not come to become policy positions that Wall Street and the money class want to become becomes law. There was a study out of Princeton that explained this. I think it was about 10 years ago. And it basically said we live in an oligarchy. And I think they're right. There's been research since that's that corroborated that finding, some that challenged that finding, but I think it's spot on. Now going back to the NASW, I think Christian, your idea of having like a dialogue, like instead of CEUs, like dialogue use or whatever you want to call them, like I think that would be so much better. It would be so much more conducive to people's learning. You know what I mean? Because you could have an interactive space where people, and I know the power of talking circles and just being in circle And I feel like those are some of the most beautiful moments. I think that's a fantastic idea and something that we can implement into, this sort of like quote unquote CEU framework. Also, other things to think about and brainstorm, like, the hoops we have to jump through for licensure. Like I said, I don't know anybody else that has to get licensed like we do. I don't know if LPCs need to do it like we do. Do they have to take, I'm not sure if they have to take 2 exams. Oh, they do? Do LMFTs have to do that too?
I think they can take 1 exam, actually. Sorry, yeah, the CEUs, though, they still have a ton of CEUs.
Okay, yeah, but just to get to licensure, I feel like it's an easier path for them than it is for us. And I feel like, a lot of social work, and again, this goes into my other point. We got to stop the whole, like, the sort of like neoliberal capitalist sort of like a passive income sort of like money, like nickel and diming students and people, social workers, every chance we get. Because sometimes I'm like, what is NASW, what do you do? Besides, I know you offer some liability, I know you offer insurance, and I know you offer CEUs and things like that, but it just seems like every time NASW just has their hand out for something. You know what I mean? You always got to pay for something. And even with supervision, things like that, like it's just always something to pay for. And so it's like, and I feel like students and, shouldn't be taking advantage like that. And then like we also with the test taking, what do they call it? The test taking industry that goes into, the whole LSW, LCSW. So those are things that we should probably look at too, in terms of, and I know, Christian, that you had some thoughts around the exam before. I remember you said something about that, your ideas for the exam.
Well, I think first of all, going to how we're deemed ready to be a social worker, right? And part of that before that you take the exams is you go through social work education. And social work education from the very beginning is often very, especially, I shouldn't say even from the very beginning, but especially when you get to the MSW level, is very illogical. You have to spend, when you learn about what you're supposed to do in graduate school, they often recommend taking 2 classes at a time. Like right now, I'm a PhD student, and 2 classes, I now know I'm busy. I'm a professor too and all that. But 2 classes is a lot of things. You may have to read, like in some classes, you have to read a book a week. So, if you took 5 classes, for example, that's 5 books. That's not possible. You wouldn't, even the book a week, you're definitely skipping some of them or not reading all of them every week. It's just not going to happen for you. Even when you get like, say a class gives you 4 articles, that's a lot. Right. 4 like 15, 20 page articles full of educational jargon and all this stuff. So if that's the case, how is an MSW advanced standing student supposed to take 5 classes a semester, plus an internship, plus pay their bills, take care of their family, practice, self-care, for example? They probably got to go to a class on self-care, but wouldn't actually really have the opportunity. And the reality is, you talk about student loans and things like that. Well, social work is set up to totally put folks into debt via student loans. And matter of fact, some of the more nefarious programs charge exactly what you can get from a student loan, like literally exactly what you can get. And some charge more, like University of Hawaii actually charges more for out-of-state tuition. But so students take out student loans because they can't, obviously you don't have time to work a full-time job. And so unless your parents are super wealthy, which sometimes you get there are definitely some good social workers that come from wealth, but there are also many more that don't come from wealth. And so then they're in debt, right? And then you graduate with your MSW, let's say, which you did all these things, right? I passed these graduate level research courses. I did 5 classes a semester, 5 graduate classes a semester, plus did an internship. That doesn't prove that I am ready to be a social worker, so you need to go give me an exam. No, that's not what they really need to do. What they really need to do is charge you an extra $350 or whatever it is that they're charging right now. And they're inefficient about it. They don't have the evidence that they really need to, and maybe they have a little bit of evidence justifying a little bit, but not really to the level of forcing it on every student. And that's the only way to show it after you spent, at least five years, very minimum, earning your social work degrees. It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. It also, I think when it comes to an exam, if there were going to be some type of exam, it should be totally place-based on where the people are at. Why would somebody like you in Philly have the exact same test or exam as somebody that's in
Alaska.
an Alaska Native village, far from any city that doesn't have? I mean, it's just a completely different situation. You know what I'm saying? So, if anything, it should be place-based locally, and even that's hard to do. And I think that there's any perfect way to do it. It would even make more sense to have it be like an interview with someone, with an individual where you can show your skills and show that you can critically think in certain situations and stuff. But I think, it's tied to all the money. And, why, or you even look at, I forgot to mention, why is the CSWE, why are they the only one that certifies social work departments, the people that give out social work degrees? Why is there nothing else? Don't we think that might lead to problems or only one way to see things? Mm-hmm. Why aren't there alternatives that are also certifying people as social workers? And I think you get into this idea of monopolies everywhere, right? There's some different organizations, but for the most part, NASW is a monopoly at what it does. For the most part, the CSWE is a monopoly at what it does. There's no alternatives. There's nobody that's really challenging them. There's not really, I'm not saying nobody is critical, because there's obviously folks in academics and stuff writing articles that are critical, and other folks that are doing stuff like decolonization and all these things. But for the most part, social work nobody, and I would challenge anybody to refute me on this, but social work collectively is not a critical profession, and it's actually the opposite and looks the other way when it gets challenged, and it goes along with the status quo when it's comfortable which is always more comfortable to go with the status quo. And for one, it leaves a lot of people on the sidelines. I think I have evidence of this for the many, many students that reach out to me, different shapes, sizes, colors, backgrounds, that say, look, I feel involved in what you're doing, but I don't necessarily feel involved in the other places of social work. To what surprised me when I first saw a post about that the NASW was sharing about voting for Kamala Harris, I just challenged it and said that they shouldn't be bipartisan, and I thought I was going to get hate, but it was actually the people that spoke up against it said the same thing. Vote for Kamala. She loves social workers, basically, or something, along those lines. But then I had the most action I'd ever had. I haven't really used LinkedIn for very long, but I had like 100 people supported that comment, which is a lot for LinkedIn. People on LinkedIn don't engage. It's not like Facebook or something, they don't do that. And so that gave me hope it made me a little bit sad to know that all these people are wandering around and they don't have anywhere that feels like represents them for who they are. But it also made me feel good to know that there are more people than I knew out there just looking for somewhere to go. And if we provided that opportunity or invited them to help to join us in creating the opportunity, then I could see it going down. And, one real quick, I think it would have to be the opposite of when we were talking about politics. We were talking about someone like Pelosi, right? Well, if we're going to hear from Nancy Pelosi as a supporter of hers, she's going to email us and tell us that she needs some extra money in order to win the next election that's coming up. So the person that's enriching themselves while being a public servant also still needs our money. She doesn't want to give us any money, even though she has much more of it than us. She wants our money. And so I think we have to avoid at all costs any opportunities I'm not saying individuals can't get paid for providing something as part of the organization, but definitely folks can't be getting enriched with large salaries or making multiple. I think even E Street's pulling salaries for multiple affiliated NASW organizations or something, right?
Right. Well, I mean, he's the CEO for, I think, 3, and that happens. When I was looking into it, there's a number of people who are pulling 1, 2, 3 salaries from NASW or its subsidiaries. So, I mean, that just says it all. I mean, how much money they'll be pulling in from that?
The organization
that is a racket.
Would just really,
yeah.
It would really have to value. No worries. It would really have to value, things like reciprocity and sacrifice and things like that. And I think, and this is me just imagining, right? Like, so let's say to get in, it was $20 a month or something, or even $5 and whatever it was. But you had this amount and people paid to be a part of it. It would have to be like full transparency. Like literally the receipt list is on a Google Doc that you can look at for the members anytime. And you can see like, look, it goes to here. It's went to here. This money went to pay for whatever. I mean, I can think of plenty of good things that you could use the money to enrich the organization and social workers. And we were even talking about, like, if it's a collective of money, then you provide for at least for certain tiers or whatever. You use that money to bring in somebody that can contribute, and you have a big dialogue series with them or something. You know what I'm saying? And that's what you use that money for. So it enriches everyone involved. Other things, that I could imagine it doing is using the income is like to once in a while help somebody that's struggling, or maybe not once in a while, but depending on how much you have a side fund that you put aside that when folks need help with something and they're navigating the other side, like licensure fees, right? That was one thing I think I meant to mention that I didn't get to with licensure. You graduate and you think that, now it's time for me to start making money as an MSW. And then you get out and you realize, like, you can't even start going to work until you get the license delivered, which can be... Do
you remember what we couldn't pay for the licenses? So we graduated, we moved to Utah, and we could not afford to get our licenses, which was preventing us from getting a job. Like, we had to borrow money to get the license to then get a job. It's just... And
then when we moved to Hawaii to get your license specifically transferred, it just never came. And so we're in Hawaii. She has a job, but she can't go to work because the license hasn't been, even though you had one.
Yeah, it was just transferring.
And so we're sitting there like we're going to go homeless with our two, infant children. And so we went in there and they just, I think I've told this story on here before maybe, but I had to basically demand that they give her license. And they said, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And then the lady was like, screw this. I'm out of here. I can't deal with this anymore. And then the manager came back out with the license.
It just took a signature. That's all it took, just to sign off on something. But this is happening to people. And if you're not as, assertive and I'm not moving as you were for me, you wouldn't have got it, and you would have been waiting another 2 weeks. I was on the phone, I remember, every single day for like a month trying to find out when I'd get my license. But so people are sitting there doing that, not getting paid, not being able to start a new job and help people and actually do their social work. What are we doing?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's incredibly a bloated and bureaucratic organization. Like if a license just needs a signature, then it should just get a signature. Like, you shouldn't be holding up people and like holding up their livelihood just because, you know what I mean? So obviously there are some things internally that need to be ironed out. And I wanted to ask you, Christian, you were talking about social work being status quo. Could you explain more about that? Because I have some ideas about that, but I want to know exactly what you mean before I.
Yeah, well, again, what I think the good juxtaposition is the idea of the evidence-based, right? Evidence-based stuff, and you're supposed to have a practice as a social worker. You're supposed to have evidence that it works, right? Either somebody else did the work before, but there's been, some kind of a research project or something that clearly, unbiasedly demonstrates that it's effective, right? But then we've talked about it last week. When anything that you do, the evidence base goes out the window. So if you were going to provide a meal for social workers to get them to come to an event, most likely, unless it was a big conference, they'd provide pizza and soda, for example. And my point in that is that not that they want to provide unhealthy food to its constituents or whoever they're, the folks that are coming, but that social workers wouldn't look at it in a critical way and look at the evidence that we have that that's not something you should feed to folks that you want to be healthy social workers, if that makes sense. And that's just one angle of it. I think another angle would be just how it's going with the Democrats. In general, within social work circles, it's assumed that those that are in those circles are Democrats. You can hear this reflected in any way, shape, or form for almost every social work event you would go to. Oftentimes, it would almost be explicitly stated by somebody at the podium or whoever's leading it. And so obviously there's, Republican can be status quo in other ways right now, but not in the mainstream way that society's working and that most folks like social workers align themselves with. And so rather than, like we were saying, looking at things in a critical manner so that we can push them forward or push our understanding forward, we as social workers go along with that stream. Instead of like creating our own stream of consciousness, we go with the stream of the status quo, and we just get swept away with it. And it prevents us from looking at anything. I shouldn't say anything. It prevents us from looking at many different things that affect us personally, politically, but especially on a social work level. It allows to look at them uncritically, and it doesn't, and although we have a value system and whatnot, oftentimes, for some reason, we have a cognitive dissonance where it makes it so that we're unable to see things. And I think another element would be in elements of like anti-racism. And so you have like Ibram X. Kendi comes out, right? And he has some good ideas. I think his first book was really great, The Stamp from the Beginning. And then How to Be an Anti-Racist, I thought it was cool because he owned things in that book and he pushed it forward, but I don't agree with everything in it. But in social work circles, I would be the bad guy for criticizing it and trying to like present a different or reframing it in a different way because I'm going out of the status quo, which is what Kendi and anti-racism is in the current moment, or even like Robin DiAngelo or whoever you would want to criticize or look at or change, adapt it a little bit. And so it's going to be really hard for us to push those ideas forward if we're just stuck in somebody puts an idea forward and you have to accept it uncritically. And even if it is right the best way, you should still be critical about it, right? Mm-hmm. But social workers don't like that. And from my place, I would be considered as the disruptor. I'm making things more complicated, and I may even have other more wild accusations that don't reflect, my actual life and what I espouse in it at all, if that makes sense. And that's a bad place for us to be in because we're shut up about dialogue, These conversations we're having right now really don't often happen in, I'm not saying they don't happen at all, but they're not common in social work circles. A more common conversation would just be, attending the next NASW event and making sure we're getting people out to vote for Harris would be more common than what we're doing. And so it's uncomfortable to go step outside of the status quo. I know it. I've been there before, and especially as a social worker, in social work circles, it's extremely uncomfortable for a variety of reasons, including, upholding of the status quo by everyone's peers and the organizations. And if you deviate from that, then, like I said, you're looked at as, man, why is Christian always got to create a problem over here? He's whatever. So rather than the problem being the problem, it's me for bringing it up. And, I think, I'm not going to speak anymore.
Is it like a situation where like it's like an emperor has no clothes situation, or I don't know, because the situation the scenario you're talking about kind of reminds me of like you would be the bad guy for bringing up certain ideas when we're just supposed to like kind of just stay in a lane, so to speak. So I do see that in social work. I do see that a lot. Again, like you say with this whole Democrat, this whole endorsement and how it really is like take orders from the top down. And I think like, so for example, like I have right here, Anthony E. Street, his reasoning for like wanting to endorse Kamala, or why he thinks the NASW should endorse Kamala. And he says, and I'll quote, "Vice President Harris is a shining example of America's promise." Okay. That sounds like an opinion. All right. Her presidential bid is historic in many ways. It's clear that she is the most qualified person in the race. Citation needed. I need to see why. I need to understand why, because she's not the only person in this race. And I think they want you to think that, just think of Trump, right? She's a proven champion of the people. Okay. Now, how does that square with her record as the DA in San Francisco and as the AG in California? I would love for E Street to answer that question. All right. And then he goes on to say... I would add something. Go ahead.
Can I just add one thing? As I've followed some folks on like Twitter and whatnot, and so I don't want to be one of those guys that acts like I know everything from seeing some social media posts. But no, the point want to make is that some of these folks have been looking for old transcripts of Kamala Harris's cases that she was a part of as, an official in California, as in different roles in California. And they've been unable to find some. And so it's very interesting, like I said, about this disclosure thing, that if I was running on my experience as this, that I should definitely have evidence available, which I was just, you were just asking for more evidence, but it's not even available. They've been, like as we know in the internet can be done, things can be made very hard to find. And that's very interesting, don't you think? That's what she often runs on, is her experience is that, but you really can't find real clear evidence of anything.
Yeah. In fact, I was, it's the weekend, so I can indulge a little bit. I watched a couple videos of some people who are following the election, and apparently there's some things coming out about, her dad's ancestry and things like that. I don't really get into that stuff, but it's very interesting. I'll just leave it there. But also, just like digging into, the situation you're talking about with her transcripts, and I feel like a lot of times these people, they have like very foggy past. They make it very hard to like dig into them and see what things were really about, or what they were really up to. And I think there are things that people want to hide with these folks. And a lot of her origin story just doesn't seem to check out. Like I remember, her in 2020, when she said something to Biden. She came for Biden on the debate stage, and she said something about that little girl was me, about being bused to school. And now I'm finding out she actually grew up in Canada. She spent, all her schooling years in Canada or something like that. I'm just like, so that little girl wasn't you. So it's just like, there's so much, these people are just so, they're packaged. They're just like packaged people who are just like given to you as like and you just believe their origin story. You just believe what you're told they are, and they're made likable through the media. You know what I mean? But it's not really working out for Kamala right now. Sorry, I kind of lost the question.
They're NPCs.
Yeah, NPCs. Absolutely.
Characters.
Non-playable characters. So that's a RPG term. Anybody who plays video games. So the characters who aren't the main characters, who just have programmed dialogue whenever you go up to talk to them, are the NPCs.
And it's just amazing how many that you can encounter in a real world. But I think we talk a lot about Harris, and I think Trump. I think we should talk a little bit about the other. I shouldn't say the other side. I should say we should look at the other side of the same coin, which would be right. Donald Trump and the Republicans, and more with them. It's interesting for me because obviously I don't align with Donald Trump in very many ways at all. And I think from my side, Trump is like this big baby with a huge ego, and he has a lot of power. And I think what makes me think that the good side of him as a president would be the fact that his ego is so big, and he wants to be loved by everyone in the end, that he would never want to go out with a war or something like that, if that makes sense. He would want everyone to just love him, and he knows that he can achieve that in that regard. But with that being said, like when I hear him talk these days, he might be kind of more normalized by RFK and Nicole Shanahan and whatever going out and talking about him these days. But he still has some wild things that he says, and he's still in like full 190% for Israel. And, when he was in there last time, he said he was going to drain the swamp, and he put a bunch of goons in there. He made the swamp, he filled the swamp with bigger swamp creatures that just looked a little bit differently. And so maybe he learned that lesson in some way, and maybe he didn't. I don't know. It's hard to say. The RFK thing is a real wrinkle in it, and we talked about him last time. And even now, he's on Trump's team, and he's just talking about health, and he's going on TV or on video and showing all the chemicals and dyes and shit in the food in America, and nobody else is talking about that politically, which is really weird. And I think that's where you get into the real nefariousness of something like the Democratic Party is. I'm sure you've heard the joke about like taking off Aunt Jemima off the syrup bottle or whatever. Is that her name? Was that the syrup? The Aunt something?
Yeah, the
syrup.
pancake. And
which I'm not
syrup,
saying it should be on there, but then all the corn syrup and dyes and shit are still in there that poison people that eat it. And so which would make the world better? I mean, like actually something practical?
Yeah, but it's like, I know you said a lot of this last time of being all about optics. It's the same thing, right? It looks good somewhat to reimagine the branding of it, but on the back, when no one reads the ingredients, the practical things, we just ignore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if they were being nefarious about the woman on the front, they were absolutely being nefarious about putting the poison in the food.
Yeah.
Right, and it's so on brand for the Democratic Party. And I'm gonna get to Trump, and then there was something that we spoke about this last time I was on, and there's something that I left off, so I'll get to that now as well. But I think the Aunt Jemima analogy is like perfect. It's so on brand for the Democrats, right? It's like you said, okay, we'll remove her from her image from the box, right? But like you said, it's still that high fructose corn syrup, the same junk ingredients that are in there, right? So like, what really changed? So, and I think that's the Democrats in a nutshell, right? So they'll come to the community, they'll kneel in kente cloth, and when George Floyd passes away, and they'll have the paint on the streets in DC, Black Lives Matter and rainbow flags and things like that. But when it comes to substantive policy, they never show up. They never show up. So I'm like, you're awesome with the virtue signaling. I mean, you guys are A+. I mean, and they get people involved, they get people riled up, but then, it's just like, there's a whole science called program evaluation, people. And I want you to apply those principles. Like, did this actually happen? Stop putting so much emphasis on what people say they're going to do, and look at the results and see what they're actually doing. Look at their actions. And if the two aren't aligning, then you got to start asking some questions. Now, for Trump isn't for me. Trump, I'm not a Trump fan. I admit I do follow him on Twitter because, I did when he was president, because when he was president, I couldn't believe we had a sitting president tweeting these things. I mean, it was just so surreal. It was crazy. But the point I wanted to make last time that I didn't finish, particularly about, I talked about the barbershop conversations being so lit, and they are, especially when I talk to black men who are wanting to vote for Trump. And, when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, who left the Democratic Party to go to the Republican Party, and like RFK Jr. as well. The one thing I don't understand is, why do you guys think, I understand why you want to leave the Democratic Party, especially to black men. Like, I understand why they want to leave the Democratic Party. And I think black women will understand too, once they go through this experience. Like, we had the experience of having Barack Obama in the White House. And I remember how we thought it was so empowering. And then we saw after 8 years, nothing changed. Nothing happened. Right. And I think black women are going to get the same experience with Kamala Harris if she gets in. If she gets in and there is no movement on women reproductive rights, if there is no codification of Roe v. Wade, and I know that I don't think there will be, because I don't think they're not going to get the House and the Senate again. They're not. Right. So I don't think there's any pathway for them to do this legislatively. So again, it's going to be like, okay, so we got to vote for you again so you can try to do this. You know what I mean? But going back to my point, I try to challenge people on, and ask them, why are you going to the Democratic Party? Like, you see, the Republican Party, like, you understand, the dynamic with the Democratic Party. I totally understand why you're not interested in voting for them. But why are you going to the Republican Party? And that's what I'm trying to get at with these guys. And like, I'm hearing a lot of issues. I'm hearing a lot of reasons why, but they're not very, some people just, these are very anecdotal, so I won't like repeat them. But what I'm trying to get people to understand is, like, you need to leave this two-party duopoly. Like you said, they're two sides of the same coins. I call it two cheeks of the same ass. You just need to, you need to be done with them. And until the Democrats understand that you can make Trump to be the most existential threat ever, we're still not going to vote for you. They will not learn the lesson until we make them understand that you have to do something for us before you. The Democratic Party will never get my vote again until they show me something. I need to see some results. I need to see something. I'm done with all that now. You got to show me something. And until then, you will never get my vote. And so I'm trying to explain to people, these aren't your only two options. I know it makes it, society makes it seem that way. The media makes it seem like you have to vote either Democrat or Republican. You do not. And also, what I say to people as well, choosing the couch is just as much of a legitimate political position as going to the polls and voting. I don't care what anybody says about that. And I can give some historical use cases where that particular strategy was useful. So yeah, so I don't judge. Yeah, they do. And I don't judge people for voting for Trump. I don't judge people for voting for Kamala. I know a lot of my friends are going to vote for Kamala. Some of my friends are going to vote for Trump, and some of our friends are going to vote Green. And I don't make any judgments. I understand why people make, and I understand, like, some black women, really, their reason for voting for Kamala is just because I want to see a woman of color as president. And I'm not, like, I get it. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna hate on that. I mean, it's super. I mean, the level that we're talking about this, that's superficial. But to that person, that is very meaningful, and it means something to them. And I understand that. I don't want to take that away. So whatever, right? But as we talk about this on a high level, I just, want to remind people that, you do have other choices besides this two-party duopoly that does not serve us. And also, I don't really think it's blue versus red sometimes. I just think it's just one purple party.
Yeah.
And that's why I think even while you have a lot of people that deviate from Trump, from the Republican Party, you'll hear them say that it's for moral values and stuff like that. But I truly don't believe it. I feel like Trump is a potential disruption to the flow of certain funds and the certain political norms that have been around for so long, that he, punches some of those in the face sometimes. And so that disgruntles both sides, especially, like someone like Mitt Romney, who's been comfortably making money, being a nice guy for, forever. I think he just disrupts that. But
and I'll say one more thing, Christian, real quick. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'll just say one thing. Another area where these two are like a purple party is anytime you get to foreign policy, the two parties will absolutely 100% agree. So that's why, I personally don't have any candidate in this race. Both candidates are hostile to Palestine, right? So who am I going to support? So I have to go green, right?
Right.
When it comes to foreign policy, these folks are on the same team at all times. It's empire, hegemony at all costs at all times. If it's any they will disagree all the time when it comes to what can we do for the American people? What can we do to make people's citizens' lives better? We have no money for this. We have no money for that. Oh, I don't know how we're going to pay for it. But as soon as Raytheon needs some more money for some more Tomahawk missiles or whatever, that check is $8 billion that is going to Ukraine. That is written, no debate, no study like they need for reparations. They need a study for reparations. We got to study that. And every time it comes up, there must be a study, right? But we don't need no study for that. We don't need no study to send weapons over to Ukraine or send them to Israel. Don't need studies for that. So I just try to let people, explain to folks budget is a numerical representation of a person's priorities, right? So look at where all your money is going and tell me how you're being prioritized and tell me where your place is in this system. But so much is still being asked of you, right? So, I just try to put it in perspective for people that way. And I'm sorry, Christian, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to get that point out.
No, you're all good. No worries. It's a little bit, we still have that little bit of delay, and I don't think it's will be on the other video. It's just on this live video. But, I was thinking, I was trying to pull it up, but just to show, but, the bombs that Israel dropped yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before? 2 days ago. But I have a couple thoughts on it. One is that I was trying to find the quote from Kamala Harris, but it's just the same thing as always, right? She'll say well, we want diplomacy and we want a ceasefire, but we unequivocally, she'll say, I want to remain unequivocally clear that I fully support Israel's right to defend itself. And I was like, I need to make I told Alicia, I need to make a video of Israel defending itself to Shaq and Kobe dunking on everyone in 2002, because they're playing a hell of a lot of offense for whatever defense they're talking about. Rudy Gobert would not succeed in that environment, if you know what I'm saying. If that was the category, if that was the criteria for defense, Rudy Gobert would not be in the league. Unfortunate, and the other side of it, I think that I wanted to talk about was, I'm a big believer in you are what you consume, right? And that's so if you eat certain food, we know that we've all ate healthy versus unhealthy food at different times, or alcohol and things like that, and you know what it does to you. And so in a sense, your body becomes what you're eating. But even further than that, I would say music is the same way, right? If you're listening to music all the time, that stuff's going to implant whatever it's talking about. It's going to ingrain you. And some of that just may be status quo stuff, like sex and whatever. But then you go to movies and TV forever, right? We're very hard on, you can only say the F word once in a PG-13 movie. They probably don't even allow it on regular TV or even TNT, I don't think, with stuff like that, cable, that you can't say the F word in certain situations or on those stations. You can't show nudity, but you can show a hell of a lot of violence, and you can show people killing each other and bombs and explosions. And as I was watching what's the name of the city that it was at?
In Lebanon?
Yeah.
Oh, Beirut?
Beirut, yeah.
Beirut.
And so I'm seeing the big explosions go up, right? And I'm like, I'm like two different people at the same time. One side of me is like, wow, I mean, that's crazy that this is I'm watching these residential people filming it, and like, I'm like thinking, what must they be thinking? How hard could that be to sit there and watch that going on and hearing it and it shaking and stuff? But then the other half of me is desensitized, and I'm like, it doesn't really elicit any major emotions in me. And I wonder, like, if it's almost deliberately done, because we know, like, the government is very heavily involved in, especially the intelligence agencies in Hollywood and whatnot. But I wonder how deliberate it is that we see so much of that bombing and violence and things like that on TV. And I wonder if we weren't so exposed to it, if it might make us a little more emotional to see something like that that's actually happening in the real world on television or whatever. Because even me, who's somebody who I feel like I care and want to care, like, I'm highly desensitized to it. And so I just wonder how deliberate or nefarious that kind of thing is, to where we're so desensitized to something like violence that we allow it to go around. We condemn it, but we allow it to go on all around us, and we pay tax money and vote for candidates that send our money to make weapons to go spread around the world for more violence. You know
I think it's even more than being desensitized, because it's glamorized. It's totally glamorized, and the fact that the military has, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure when I was looking into this, the military literally has a whole department within Hollywood. How is it that connection seems extremely nefarious to me and very intentional. So desensitized, numbed, glamorized, and that is, I think, why we do. When we see the news and people are like, oh, okay.
Did you know? Yeah, they, like, I don't know exactly how the details of it work, but, like, for example, I think a very good example is the Black Panther movie, right? One of the good guys is a white CIA or FBI agent. I can't remember, CIA, I think. But somehow they have these agreements or some rules in place where they make them show them in a certain light, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, they do.
And so you see films like that, which, you think, like Black Panther, if you're affiliated in any way symbolically with the Black Panther movement, they wouldn't have a CIA agent in there as one of the good guys, right? But then they integrate that in there, and so it normalizes it just a little bit. And then at the end of that show, what was the solution? It was like an educational program.
I wish I could remember the movies I was looking into, because it was crazy how much that the military had to sign off on how it was portrayed. And obviously it's portrayed in favor of the American military. But yeah, sorry, were you going to say something, Ken?
Yeah, so a lot of these films, especially if it's a military film, like if they want to use military hardware, helicopters, things like that, the DOD would be like, okay, yeah, you can have this, you can have these helicopters, you can have these tanks, you can have these Humvees, you can have all this, but we got to look at your script and we got to approve everything that goes into that movie, right? It doesn't only happen in Hollywood though. It happens in video games. So I'm a gamer. I play video games, and everybody is familiar with Call of Duty. So I forget which Call of Duty it was. I think it was the one that came out in 2013 or 2014. So first of all, the first mission in this game, you're fighting in the Angola Civil War on the side alongside Jonas Savimbi, which is like the side that was backed by the US and the Israelis and that, right? So obviously you're on the wrong side. That's not the side you want to be on, right? But they're glorifying it, right? Then I noticed there was a later game where in the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, 1991, on the way back from Kuwait, the Iraqi army was retreating back from Kuwait, and the U.S. military bombed them as they were retreating. They call this the Highway of Death, right? If you just Google Highway of Death, you'll see what happens. In this Call of Duty game, they blamed the Highway of Death on the Russians. The Russians weren't anywhere near this conflict, and in fact, Saddam and the Soviets were allies. This would have never happened, but they retconned history to make the U.S. look better and to paint the U.S. in a better light. So, I mean, when it comes to Hollywood and the military, the CIA, the DOD, they're all up and through, not just Hollywood, but also video games too. And when it comes to being desensitized, like the images that are coming out of Beirut, and even still, some of the images that are coming out of Gaza, still, I'm still seeing like images of children flattened, and like there was one image that was burned into my head that I'll never forget of a young girl hanging off the side of a building, and like her legs from the knee down were just shredded. And I saw another kid with just like his head just opened, everything inside his head just out, and it's just like, I mean, I have to like, sometimes I have a hard time like even enjoying, like if I go to a Phillies game with my friends, like sometimes I even have a hard time just enjoying it because I know what the hell is going on in other places. You know what I mean? I have a hard time checking out sometimes, and like I'm really depressed over it, like over what's happening like in the world a lot. You know what I mean? So like when it comes to being desensitized too, I think like they want us to see these images. Especially the Zionists, they want us to see these images. They want us to see these images coming out of Beirut. They want us to, and also what I'll say is like, you know, we're always, when it comes to like victimhood and things like that, like the media always wants to paint, will always defend Israel as if they're not the ones perpetrating this, but it's just like a massive demonization of all the people in the Middle East. And they're just expected not to fight back. Like when the U.S. When they always issue a statement after Iraq. Okay, one example: in Iraq, a high Iranian figure was bombed and killed in the Iranian consulate in Damascus earlier in the summer. Right, the Israelis killed him, and the first thing the U.S. did was, we want you to practice restraint. We want you, please don't escalate. This is what they're saying to the Iranians, right? And they're saying this again to Hezbollah, right? Don't respond. We want restraint. So it's like Israel can do whatever it wants to you, and we will not hold them accountable, nor will we chastise them. We'll just they'll play lip service like, hey, you shouldn't do this or whatever. They're not really serious about it. But it's just like, yes, we can hit you. We can destroy you, but you are not allowed to respond. You are not allowed to retaliate. So in a way, and I feel like they mock us. Like if you watch Israeli, like I was watching Israel, actually in 2023, Israeli news was lit because there was like a whole bunch of stuff going on in the Knesset, like in between like Netanyahu's faction and then these other factions. Like they wanted him out of there. So it was a lot of palace intrigue right before October 17th even popped off in 2023. But I still continue to watch Israeli media. I mean, these folks say some of the most open-ended, racist and vile genocidal stuff that you've ever heard on television. And I'm like, I know you guys over in MSNBC's offices know that these people are saying this on those broadcasts, but you would never show that to the American people. Of course, you have to interpret it or translate it, but a lot of it has subtitles. They want us to see these images. They want us to feel like to be hopeless. They want us to feel like we can't win. And I think the Zionists are, especially the folks in Israel, I mean, they're on TV all the time talking about this stuff. So I think they want us to feel desensitized or make us feel hopeless, not so much desensitized, but make us feel hopeless by all the carnage that we're viewing and witnessing, So I just challenge everybody, don't ever be comfortable with seeing this. This will always be wrong. This will never, ever be okay. And this needs to come to an end ASAP. And we got to have a serious conversation about the country we live in that condones and basically is facilitating this. They're sending more troops to the Middle East now.
I think, you can easily look, you pull up APAC, who they donate to politicians, all the top politicians from both sides of the aisle are on there. So it's
and then want to scream about Russians hacking our election or Russian, like people are being...
Yeah,
it makes no sense. I mean, you want an obvious story about somebody interfering in elections? This is the biggest layup you could ever have, but you're not allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to say anything. So it goes to what you were saying earlier, Christian, about cognitive dissonance, right? Like the emperor has no clothes. It's like we can see right here an example of a foreign government interfering in our elections, but at the same time, we have to pretend that it's not happening. And in fact, no, look at the Russians or the Iranians or the North Koreans. They're interfering in our elections, but they never have like proof of that. They just say, oh, just believe us because we're telling you. But we have proof of the Israelis, but you don't ever want to talk about that. I mean, it's fascinating to me, but I'll shut up because I've been rambling.
Oh, you're good. I think that I'm going to go full conspiracy level right now. So, hate me for it if you want. But I think that am either coming to some realizations or, my imagination's been duped. But I think that like you can draw tie all the stuff we're talking about, the unequivocal support for Israel and the weapons and all of this stuff, and like the P. Diddy thing. And where I say I draw the similarities or connect the dots there would be that it seems to me that I'm learning that folks often in positions of power, maybe like some of the hugest heavy celebrity type of things, as well as some politicians, that the only way to get to those positions somehow is that you're compromised. And because it's the only reason that I can come up with that certain people would go along with and not speak up with like things like the Diddy thing, or why that almost nobody in politics will speak out in against Israel in a way, and that's really weird. That almost nobody, and some of it's logical, like we said, the money, right? The circle of money, but it seems deeper than that. That so many people, when you look at the numbers and the amount of children that are being killed, that takes a lot to look away. And even deeper, you got like folks going and signing the missiles, politicians signing the missiles and things like that, and to both Ukraine and Israel. And I don't want to go into it at all. It just seems to me like when I try to connect those dots of like why so many people are so gung-ho and there's nothing that can be done. They could like literally blow off Japan and they would like justify it somehow. And so the only answer I think is folks have been compromised. But I think the social worker in me wants to turn back a little bit and end. We got to get going. But an end with talking about Israel and Jewish people in America and whatnot, because one of the things that I've run into as a professor, and especially with the podcast talking about these issues, is the idea of for example, my Jewish students. And they reach out to me in different ways and in different ones. Some of them, upset. Well, I could say only one, kind of a little bit upset. And the rest are more just like reflecting like, I know I don't agree with, say, for example, I don't agree with Netanyahu and what's going on, but I'm also like afraid to even say that I'm Jewish in some places and contexts. And then for me, and I've talked about this before and I try to be open about it, is like I don't have connections to Jewish culture or like a history. I grew up in Utah. I've spent most of my adult life in Hawaii and Alaska, and there just hasn't been a huge presence. And so when ideas around it come up, I don't have the personal experience to go back on. However, like we watch children's shows, and sometimes I like to show them old shows, and sometimes I'm shocked when I see how people are depicted in the old shows that I didn't notice when I was a kid. And these are everybody from Asian folks to black people to Native Americans to Jewish people. And like for an example was we were watching the, there's the old Disney cartoon of the big bad wolf and the three little pigs, and he goes around blowing the house down. And I had come across the article once that said that the wolf was originally a Jew. And I was like, no way. And I looked it up, and the original film was a caricature of a Jewish person going around and doing the same type of thing. And I've just noticed it in so many places. And so I just want to take the time, as we spend a lot of time criticizing Israel on this podcast, is trying to separate that idea. I had a student specifically reach out to me and, telling me, I just want you to know that all Jews aren't affiliated with that side of things. And I just want to honor that I know that, but it's also a challenge for me to like use the right language and use the right to frame it the right way. So I just want to say that I respect you and honor all folks, and especially take the time to honor my Jewish students and just say, we need to keep talking about it, and I have a lot to learn. And I just want you to know I'm not trying to criticize in any way any individuals or groups of people, because I don't know. What I'm trying to criticize is an international policy from a government in Israel and folks in that government. And I just think it's still hard for me to talk about, because I figure like what's the right way to frame it, or what's the language that I use, because I'm still kind of muddled in my own mind.
But I think if we can keep having dialogue on it, that's what's important, right? Like you say, we're being critical about a government and the actions of that government, and not Jewish people as a whole. But we have to be able to talk about it. Ken, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Absolutely, I agree with you guys. Particularly for our Jewish students and and Jewish friends, right? I tell them I empathize with them so much because I think Jewish people are some of the biggest victims of this entire this ordeal. And I say that because first, let me preface by just saying a story. It'll be real quick. One of my students at a high school this past summer, he came up to me. Actually, I was talking to them and we had a conversation, and they were telling me about how last summer, 2020, or sorry, last fall, they went to a demonstration at one of the big train station here in Philly called 30th Street Station. And at the time, JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, was having a demonstration. They were having like a die-in or a sit-in. They did a lot of demonstrations at 30th Street. But here's the key. Now, my student had told me, and I could see the cogs turning in his head, right? He's like, on the news, they tell me that, the people who are protesting and, demonstrating, they're supporting Hamas, they're terrorists and this and that. But he's like, the lady in there that I see sitting there is my teacher that I saw, right? And I know she's a good person. And this was his teacher from middle school, right? So he saw a couple people that he knew, teachers or like school aides or something like that, because they were part of JVP and they were in there demonstrating. So he's like, so this was his moment of learning to differentiate between what you hear in the media and how they portray people and what you see with your own eyes. And you see that that's not the case with those folks, right? So that's one of the unintended consequences of how the media being dishonest. Now people can see through your BS, right? And another thing, I try to tell people that we have to make a distinction not between Jewish people and Zionists, right? It's Zionists are, I think they're privileged and protected class. I mean, they could get a congressional hearing at the drop of a hat whenever they want to and just say, everything is anti-Semitic. And a lot of the, anti-Semitic statistics are coming from, what is it called? I forget the guy's name in his organization, but they count a lot of, so some of the things that they count as being anti-Semitic. So when you see that big increase of anti-Semitism, you look into their methodology. Oh, so anybody saying free Palestine is counted as an occurrence of anti-Semitism. So, that contributes to boosting anti-Semitism up this like X amount of percentage points. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, it's completely and utterly like a fabricated like issue. And they try to make it about Jewish people in particular, but it's not about Jewish people in particular at all. This is not about being being an anti-Semite. And in fact, if anybody try to smear me as anti-Semite, I just look at you and like you're crazy, like you're stupid. Me being for Palestine and being anti-colonization is not anti-Semitic at all, because that's what I'm standing against. I'm standing against colonization. I'm standing against self-determination for Palestinian people and statehood for Palestinian people. That does not mean in any way, shape, or form that I don't have the same ideas for Jewish people as well. You know what I mean? This is not about This is not about Judaism, the religion. This is not about Jewish people, the ethnic Jewish people. This is about Zionism, which in my opinion is a white supremacist ideology. So you cannot conflate Judaism with Zionism. They're two totally different things. And I'll leave it at that. And now, like I said, Jewish people are one of the biggest victims here, because they literally are figuratively being used as human shields so that this Zionist project can continue to, go on. Zionism wants anti-Semitism. It needs anti-Semitism to thrive, in fact.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff a bunch of it is manufactured. It goes along with manufactured consent. But, I think before we go, just the term Zionism, it would be a good key word to do like a genealogical history on, right? Because so many different groups lay claim to it in different ways. When I grew up in Utah, right, we have the Mormons, who, like everything's named after Zion. We got Zion National Park. The banks are named after Zion, the Bank of Zion, like everything, like so many things go after Zion. And then later on, I got into reggae music, and her family comes from Jamaica, so we start learning about their Zionism, and listen to reggae music. They're always talking about Mount Zion and the Lion of Judah and all sorts of things. And so it's just interesting how many different groups use that term. And because we had a term, because we used to have a little studio that was decorated, and she made the sign that said "Welcome to Zion." And now it's a little bit of time's passed. I realized how that could be misinterpreted by so many different people, because there wasn't quite the discourse going on at that time about the negativity around Zionism, not quite to its level now. I read a book by Norm Finkelstein, which was before any of this the current stuff happened. It's like 10 years old, and you could read it, and it's the same. I mean, you could just change the dates in there for the most part. The same language is being used and to justify the same type of things. And I saw Benjamin Netanyahu when he was here. He gave a speech warning the Lebanese to leave. For some reason, he gave it in America in English to warn them to leave. And it just I think it really epitomized the whole situation from my perspective, because, I've seen what they did to Gaza, and I saw the bombs that they actually dropped there. And what do you mean? Because he talked about it in the frame. You can leave and then you can come home later. Come home to what? What are you talking about? Come home later. And just keeps talking about it as a defense. And then, it's very clear that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't think very highly of the people in those areas, because he talks about them in, animals and dehumanizing savages, and the language that he uses, and that also desensitizes us, right? To if you think about some building full of animals dying, it's a lot different than you think in a building full of people like you, and that shows you can watch them blow up all those residential buildings in Lebanon, but look at the way we reacted to the towers, ostensibly being flown into. How do we react to that with huge force and more inhumanity, and the list goes on and on and on. But then when we see that, for some reason it doesn't elicit anything. We don't see those people. I don't mean we as on us right here, but we as this country, we don't see the people that die and the children die in those. We don't see them as us for some reason. We don't see that. Somehow we are able to overlook that the child there is the same as your child, and that child doesn't know nothing at this point about even why they're a Palestinian or why they're from Lebanon or what's going on. They don't know. And we talk about doing things deliberately and whatnot. If you wanted to create opposition in the region forever, you'd do exactly what's going on right now, because everybody that's witnessing all those kids and whatever, that shit's going to be in their heart. That's some shit that you don't really get over. So you either go down the deep road on depression and shit, or you go down a deep road of vengeance, and it's just common sense.
I think we're on the precipice of a changing world, Christian. I don't think Israel comes back from this.
It'll be very interesting to see how it's looked at in a bit of hindsight, but I think that we ought to keep having these discussions, because we only have about 6 weeks or so till the election, and something's going to go down. Some people aren't going to like what's the way that things are trending to go down, and something's going to go down. And I would say before it's changed now, but my prediction before, if Biden were still the president and we were in this position right now and Biden were still running, I shouldn't say still president, because he actually is still the president, but if he were running still and he felt like he might lose, or the Democrats felt like he would lose, then they would have most definitely escalated all the wars, or whatever war they could.
Absolutely.
Because almost never do we kick somebody out of the presidency when we're in the midst of war, and that was obvious with George Bush.
That may still be the plan, because it looks like a regional war may pop off soon, especially with Nasrallah being killed by Israel. I don't think we escape it. Well, so we'll have a lot to talk about. Kids, so. Yeah, I understood. Yeah. But we'll have a lot to talk about in the coming weeks.
For more politics with the election.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good. It was great to connect with you guys again.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, Ken. Thanks to everybody that ends up tuning into this. And I just wanted to add at the end, if you make it this far, and you listen to the ideas that we had, and you had questions, or you're like, I wonder what if they said more about this, or I think they're ignoring this. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to, flesh these ideas out even more. We're not at all about thinking that we know everything. I know I don't know anything, and I'm sure the other two know as well. So if you are listening at this point, then I highly recommend to reach out, or if you have questions or want to be affiliated with Revolutionary Social Work or anything, then all our information is on all our YouTube videos and all that hit us up. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Ken.
All right, Ken. We'll see you next
Thanks,
time.
guys. See you next time. Have a good one.
Peace.
You've been listening to the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, and we just want to say thank you for your continued support. You can catch us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share our content with the world. But most of all, never forget to keep being revolutionary. Peace.